Morning, everybody. It is 10:30. Are we ready to start in terms of the technical crew and this being recorded and streamed, etc.? Suzanne, are we ready to start? Yes, thank you very much indeed. Welcome, everybody, and to the second meeting of this newly formed Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And welcome particularly to our Metro Mayor. Thank you very much for giving us your time this morning. A few technical matters. We are quorate today. I'm delighted to see the last minute arrival of two of our members, without whom we would not have been quorate. So Ben and Zoe, you're very particularly welcome today. So thank you very much for being here, everybody. Firstly, evacuation procedure. These formal things we have to go through. In the event of a fire, please await direction from the West of England Combined Authority staff who will assist with evacuation. Please do not return to the building, instructed to do so by the fire wardens. Can I also remind you that this meeting is being live streamed and can be watched on the authority's YouTube channel live, and the recording thereafter should you wish to do so. For members of this committee and those speaking, could you please use your microphones when you're addressing the committee, and once you have finished speaking, please press the button to switch the red light off, which will prevent background noise being recorded and broadcasted. And not only does it make it easier for people in the meeting here today to hear, this is the mechanism by which sound is heard live streamed and on the recording. Could I please ask whether there are any apologies for absence today?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Jerome Thomas.
Yes, thank you.
And we have his replacement, Ellie Freeman from Bristol City Council, who's just sat there.
Welcome, Ellie. Thank you very much for coming. We very much appreciate that. Have we had apologies from Councillor Pocock, who is not here? I think that's the only other councillor who isn't here and who we haven't heard from. Okay, thank you very much. Declarations of interest, item 3 on our agenda. Do any members have any interests to declare on any items of business to inform us today? No, thank you very much indeed. So moving on swiftly to questions to our Metro Mayor, who is very kindly attending this meeting. We're very grateful to him. He's a very busy chap to fitting in coming to see us today. This item is scheduled to last no longer than 30 minutes, after which we will leave let the Mayor leave and continue with the rest of the business of the meeting. Can I remind people that this is not the moment in the meeting for questions or statements which have been submitted from the public. That comes later at item 6. This is a half an hour where members of this committee can ask questions of the Metro Mayor. So can I turn this section of the meeting over to members of the committee and ask whether anyone who would like to ask Metro Mayor the first question? To Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Mayor, for attending today. I have to start the question on bus franchising with a brief history lesson. The WECA's bus strategy published in 2020 promised to investigate franchising as part of an operational framework to be published in 2022-23. That didn't happen. In September 2023, the Mayor met with Andy Burnham and issued a statement saying that his staff will be preparing a detailed report on bus franchising to be published in early 24. In March 2024 at committee, the Mayor answered to a member of the public saying that a report on bus franchising would be coming very soon. In May 2024, at the Bristol local elections, bus franchising formed part of the manifestos of the 3 biggest parties in the city. In June and July 2024, bus franchising formed part of Labour's national manifesto and a key part of their pledges to the country. Now, we have a report coming to committee which is 8 pages long and says effectively nothing at all other than agreeing that bus franchising alongside some other options is something that we should do another study on, and we won't see the outcomes of that study until financial year 2025, so at least another 9 months before the public get to see any outcomes. So my question to the Mayor is, what have you and your combined authority been doing in all that time when you say you've been working on bus franchising, where actually we don't see anything at all?
Thanks very much, Toby. Appreciate that. Well, look, I'm always very guarded and careful about these things, and I've always talked about 2024 as a year. It will happen sometime this year that the report will come through. But I've never ducked the fact that I don't think franchising is a silver bullet, and I notice other people are saying that too as we look into this and have the discussions both in the media and elsewhere. So I anticipate that the report will come through this year, as I indicated. I think officers got a little bit overambitious and said early in 2024. They shouldn't have said that because it was never going to be possible to do it that quickly, frankly. And I think we will need to have fuller reports because we have particularly unique challenges in our region. You will have heard me perhaps talk about some of these things already, about we don't have an income stream, which is hugely important. We will require huge investment from unitary authorities, and the local unitary authorities currently are not increasing the bus levy, frozen it, because they say they're under such difficulty. So that doesn't bode well for the huge investment in comparison that will be required for franchising from local councils. And similarly, from national government, we need to know what's going to happen nationally in terms of providing resource, because as you may be familiar, Toby, Greater Manchester got quite a lot of money in order to do what they're doing and carrying on with, and that's great for them. But what we have to do is make sure that whatever we get is great for us. So there's a lot of things we have to do. We also don't have a transport executive, which we need to have. It's an essential requirement to have franchising. So even on the legal front, we are not in the place where we yet need to be. So it is complicated. Look, I'd love to have done this report the year before last, never mind this year. It would have been great to do that. But as we've done preliminary investigations, what we've discovered is that it's very complicated, very intense. We need to take into account whatever it is the new government is going to say. And obviously that's not yet clear either. So there are a whole lot of things. So we're going to have this report later this year, and we'll have a further report next year because we're going to have one to take into account all the variables that are not yet clear. Okay, thank you. Good question.
I apologise. Thank you, Councillor Wells. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Based on the fact that preliminary work has been done, could that work be made available to the Scrutiny Committee for oversight?
I have no problem to any work that we do being made available to you guys. That's okay by me.
Thank you very much. Councillor Weston.
Thank you very much, Chair, and congratulations, Dan, on your recent election as well. I don't think I've spoken to you since. Oh, I should Mayor rather than Dan. Apologies. No worries. Yeah, on rail, if that's okay. So obviously 2 questions. One of them is, and this is where the horrible use of rail-based puns comes out, so apologies on that. Are things still on track in regards to the Henbury line and the planning application for that? And second of all, obviously we've seen the announcements and the possible threat to the Porter's headline. Are you able to talk us through what may or may not be happening with that? Are there funding opportunities that we're not aware of that we should be potentially aware of? I just would like an update on both, please.
Well, it's good to talk to you, Mark. Thank you for your question. So the first one on the Henbury line is, well, it's on track in as much as these projects ever are, because they're never on time and they're never where people expect them to be and where people say they're going to be. But well, it's been interesting being the region's mayor, because what I've learned is how slow some of the organisations are, and the deadlines are pretty meaningless, which is very frustrating because we obviously work as an organisation with our unitary authorities to try and make sense of these timetables so that we can fit in other things. And I've heard you talk about the Brabazon site, and I've certainly talked about that too. And, we've seen that happen there, haven't we? Things that we would like to be planning and in anticipation of the station being open have not been possible, and you've rightly drawn attention to that. So it's on track in as much as these things are ever on track. So I'm not aware of anything that's saying, look, there's a huge unexpected delay compared to normal. Is it as prompt? Is it as efficient as it should be? No, I am puzzled why in this country we can't do what other countries in Europe do. And it seems to me that they're able to build tracks, plan them, get on with them and fund them, and anticipate them arriving with much greater accuracy than we ever seem to be able to do. But I suspect that's slightly above our pay grade to get sorted, but we should rightly draw attention to our dissatisfaction with that. Then in terms of the Porter's headline, look, the I've made a commitment as mayor with my combined authority colleagues to additionally fund another £10 million not so long ago. North Somerset Council did that as well in order to keep the project literally and metaphorically on track. There were issues about what the costs would actually be. I think it's true to say that the plans have been very over-engineered. When you look at the cost per kilometre, it's quite high compared to other tracks that have been put down. I wonder why. I'm not sure what that's about, but I do wonder why. I think we now have a degree of cost stability so that we kind of know what we're dealing with, because the big anxiety, as you know, Mark, was that we were told it was going to cost 100 million and it was going to be near 150 million. And we're thinking, well, based on that record, where could it be? Well, look, that's pre my time. So you've got an even longer history of this. Does that mean it's going to be 200 million now, 250? We don't know. But I think there is cost stability around 150 million. And I think that we are in a strong position now to be able to proceed with that. But it's not a guarantee, because that's obviously a decision that's being made against lots of other projects that are going on up and down the land. But what I am confident about saying is that our Porter's headline, I would argue, is so close to starting that puts it in a strong position to go forward. I think that they were clearing the track side of trees and various other foliage with a view to doing significant things in the spring and actually getting on with the tracks. I noticed that Bitton Railway has taken some of the old line and used that, which is good to know. So we're very, very close to doing it. So I think that puts us in a strong position, because we're literally at the point of putting shovels in the ground. The other thing about it is I just think economically it makes a lot of sense compared to the other lines that are up in contention against us. So the government will have to make a priority list. They will have to decide. I'm quietly confident that it will go ahead, but nothing's done till it's done, as we know. If that's not the sort of the statement that you say about the Porter's headline, you think you've got it, and then somehow it slips out of grasp. So it ain't done till it's done, but I think we're very close, and I'm quietly confident.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor. Obviously, the recent funding announcement did create a bit of a gap on that. You seem to be implying that there's going to be a sort of a funding round coming forward. I've not heard of that. Where's that coming from? Has it been announced yet, or is this just informal conversations happening with Treasury and the transport officers at the moment? Because they cancelled the Rail for the Future grant, which I believe Porter said was partly relying on.
I'm not certain what the exact stream will be, funding stream. Okay. What I know is that some projects will be going ahead, but it'll be reduced compared to what was originally planned. And I'm not going to get into the party politics of it, because I don't think that helps anybody here in our part of the world. But what I do know is that we are very much in contention, that I'm certainly having discussions that suggest that that is the case. And as I said, I'm quietly confident, but it's not done till it's done.
Final, I promise, Chair. Same subject, though. Obviously, work was due to start in the spring. I know from what you're saying, those conversations are being had. Will they happen in time for work to start in the spring?
My understanding is that a decision should be made that shouldn't curtail that if we are a winner. Okay.
Next question from the committee. Does anyone have anything they would like to ask the Mayor? Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor, referring to the Solace report, which is part of the papers under the best value notice, can I ask the Mayor what personal actions he's taking to improve communications with his officer base, and in particular senior officers within the organisation, which are identified as still being an issue in this latest report? Thank you.
Thanks, Toby. Well, look, I'm always available to anybody, because they all have my phone numbers. They all know how to get hold of me, and I make myself available. What I'd simply say about the whole report is I don't recognise a lot of the things that are in it, to be honest. And that's because I know what happened. No one asked me. And I just simply say, isn't that interesting that I was never asked about what happened? Because it seems to me that if you want to know what the truth is, you need to get the stories of everybody in order to get a complete picture. So I think that's all I can say, really. It's not, there's never been an issue by officers who want to get hold of me or members who want to get hold of me getting hold of me. Always happy to talk to people. they have to reach out as well as me make myself available. I'm certainly available. This committee is a good example of that, where the previous mayor didn't attend at all. I certainly do attend it. I think it's important, and that's reflected in my wider mayoral work as well. Thank you.
Councillors, I actually had almost exactly the same question. So can I ask a follow-up question in relation to that, Metro Mayor? The quotations that Councillor Wells were referring to at page 234 of the SOLAS report, and the two particular statements, which I think are of interest to bring forward, are these: communication between the Mayor and senior officers of the combined authority is not comprehensive or consistent enough. And the second quotation is: the system of using a red box for communication between the Mayor's office and the organisation is not fit for purpose for modern regional government. Now, Metro Mayor, we've heard before, you tell this committee and others that you're always available to communicate with people. Clearly what we need are systems that everyone understands and that are recognisable to ensure that that happens. And so what practical steps are you going to take to improve the systems of communication and perhaps get away from the red box system currently used?
Well, I'm not going to remove the red box system. The red box system is the system that's used by government ministers, is established, has been built up and developed over hundreds of years, works very effectively for government ministers. It should work very effectively for us. It's also a way of being absolutely certain, Chair, that we are agreed on what we're communicating about. And one of the things that I have always found very difficult about the mayor role is the requirement by many people, not just officers, but also councillors, for informal discussions, hidden, secret discussions, which I'm very against. I believe that I have to be accountable to the people as well as to this committee and others, and officers too. And I believe that you have to do things wherever possible in the open. And I know that your party isn't necessarily keen on that. They want to have, pre-meetings that are hidden away from the public. And the reason, and let me be very clear with you, Chair, why I say that. When I came in, I found that the organisation was dysfunctional and the relationship with the unitary authorities was dysfunctional. That was very clear very early on. That wasn't about me as an individual. That had been happening prior to me. That had been happening under the previous mayor. There's lots of evidence, and I'm sure people in this room who were around at the time will also be able to, to testify to that. So what was required was a situation where we didn't have, well, look, you give me 50 million, Mayor, and I'll do this. I don't want that. I want that to be open. If people want to do deals, they should be able to do that openly. Now, that doesn't mean that informal discussions and communications don't happen. Sometimes I get texts from your leader of the Baines Council at 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes he'll send me something. So there's all sorts of ways of communicating and getting across, but the red box system is a tried and tested system. It means that you've got a trail so you can see what people have agreed and what people have said. I think that if it's good enough for the British government, it should be good enough for our regional mayor area. So I don't accept that that's not a good system. If there's a need for informal stuff, there are ways of doing that. I am resistant to having secret meetings. But that doesn't mean that occasionally, Chair, that sometimes you need to have informal meetings. Of course, I understand that. But those only happen in the context of trust. And there hasn't been trust. And when I first became mayor, I think it's fair to say that it was from the very first meeting, but difficult. And I remember talking to the then leaders, because only one of them is still in situ, saying it's an odd way to build friends and win relationships and build a trust by attacking without notice, by putting down amendments without giving notice in the very first meeting when the mayor's been elected for, I think it was 2 weeks or something. So that takes time. Now, I think what we need to remember with this report is it's a snapshot of the past. What we mustn't do, and that's why I hope that you will be responsible in this too, we mustn't look at the past and suggest that it's what's going on now. Because it isn't going on now. It's much better than it's been. And that is very much to the credit of all concerned. And I hope people will see that, as including me too. But if we're going to constantly be stuck in the past and not look forward about what we need to do, there's been lots of change that I think most people would agree has been quite positive and certainly better than things that have happened in the past. So I hope that we won't get stuck in that trap, because what I can tell you is, whether we like it or not, And as a socialist, I'm not into being competitive, but actually we are competing with other regional mayor areas. And if we're going to constantly refer to the past and the problems as they once were, rather than the problems as they are now and the challenges that we need to address now, we are going to be disadvantaged as we try and seek resource and powers from a new government. And I hope none of us want that for our constituents, because actually it's really, really important that we not only move forward, but we catch up, because I think what's happened under the previous mayor was that we didn't have a system that was fit for purpose. We didn't have a political way of operating that was appropriate. It seemed to me that officers made an awful lot of decisions without politicians being involved, and that's wrong in my view. So I think that we've just got to look forward. I'm not saying you can't raise any of these questions, but I think, remember, they're snapshots of the past, and if we want to revisit them, I guess we're going to revisit them. But I don't want to revisit them because I think the lessons have already been learned based on what we've achieved and what we've done and the monies we've got in since.
Thank you, Metro Mayor. Well, we have an ongoing transformation programme in response to the best value notice and the conclusions of the Grant Thornton recent report and the SOLAS report. So I'm sure that we will hear whether your optimism is reflected in greater communications and better working practices. And very much hope that that you are right in that. Members of the committee, does anyone else have any questions? So, Councillor Addison.
Yeah, it's kind of a strategic one. At South Gloucestershire Council, we're looking at improving renewable energy resources in the area. And one of the things that's come up, I think, both here at the combined authority level and at South Gloucestershire, is the difficulty of connecting any kind of significant project in this area to the national grid. And I was wondering, I mean, we had this discussion at combined authority last year, and I wondered if there was any prospect of progress with the national grid, any pressure you think you can leverage to get this solved?
David, thank you for that. That's a good question. I'm not aware of any particular breakthroughs, I'm afraid, on that, because that is critical. As I always say, look, I'm very, very keen for us to move to more sustainable forms of transport. But at the moment, an awful lot of the calories that are required to move us around come through diesel or petrol. In order to put all those huge amounts of energy through to all the electric vehicles and other vehicles, hydrogen maybe as well, that we want, requires, certainly as part of that, a grid that can cope, because actually we've been held back, and I'll ask my chief executive to comment in a moment, but we've kind of been held back because even though we've had funds to do quite a lot of exciting things, there wouldn't be enough power coming through the main wires to enable those to work. So we've been held back in our progress somewhat. I'll invite the chief executive who's indicating he wants to say something.
It's a really good point. I think we hosted in my previous role at Bristol. I know that the chief executive of National Grid Infrastructure was working closely with cities up and down the land because they recognised this problem. It wasn't altogether reassuring the closer I got to the people who are supposed to be doing the planning. If I'm perfectly honest, there's a recognition of a real problem, and I think the opportunity now is to recognise it sits at the heart of the growth agenda, because the growth plans that, as you know, mayoral combined authorities have all been asked to submit are all about how we get the economy moving. So I think with the renewed interest around the English devolution bill in particular, I think there's a real opportunity, and I know my colleagues in the policy team are here. It's something that, as UK mayors generally, we are playing back to government, because decarbonising our grid is an economic as well as a social and environmental challenge. So I think it's the right time to be resurfacing that question.
Thank you.
Committee, are there any other questions which members of the committee would like to ask the Metro Mayor? I've not got any hands raised. I have one further question, Metro Mayor, which is also arises from the SOLAS report, which states that the combined authority currently has no deputy mayor, and I'm quoting from the report, and given some growth in trust and confidence, there is a willingness on behalf of the mayor to revisit the idea of an appointment to this post. That's obviously an interesting statement in the SOLAS report. And so my question, Metro Mayor, was what plans are there in relation to such a post, and what would be the timetable for that?
Okay, well, I've never had a problem about having a deputy mayor, provided I could trust them. Obviously, you've got to know that they're going to be saying the things that are going to reinforce the mayor's role. But let me just give you some context as to why we are in this situation. When I came to be your mayor, there had previously been a deputy mayor who was funded for that role. When I asked my officers to give me a list of all the things that they'd done, they were unable to do so. When I asked the person who had that role if they could tell me what they'd done and do they have any diary entries, because I wanted to consider the mayor issue and whether it was an effective role and how it might develop in the future, they were unable to tell me what they had done. And I kept writing and emailing and asking, and that came to nothing. So I didn't have great confidence in the import of a deputy mayor at that point, although in theory I'm very happy to have one. But look, I think most people would understand that a deputy mayor at the moment is restricted to the leaders of the councils from which I can choose. And I'd actually like that to be widened. I'd like the constitution to make it any councillor that exists on any of the unitary authorities within the combined authority area. And I think that would allow me to be able to proceed very confidently then to have somebody that I know would do a good job and could be trusted.
That's very clear and helpful. Thank you. Any other questions for the Metro Mayor? We do have him for another 8 minutes by my reckoning. And if no one else has a question, I do have one last question, which is, again, from the SOLAS report, lots of interesting stuff in there, in relation to the comment in the SOLAS report that there is a need for a fresh combined authority approach to housing strategy in the absence of a regional spatial plan. I thought it might be interesting and to hear from you, Metro Mayor, what practical steps you're intending to take to develop a fresh approach to housing strategy, given the absence of a regional spatial plan.
Well, I think we just need a plan for housing, because the problem was that it was scuppered. We had the regional spatial strategy, as you know, Chair, and it was vetoed by one of the council leaders. It happened to be South Gloucestershire at the time, and that meant we couldn't proceed, which was a disadvantage, I felt, because we're now having to deal with that because the government are clearly indicating that's the kind of thing they want to be doing. And we may have been 2 years ahead of that, which would have been helpful to us and would have helped us in our competitions with other regions to get on with things. But I just want to say, though, that remember, this has always been a challenging area. People will remember, I can't remember what it was called, perhaps someone can remind me, but there was a previous regional strategy that was absolutely disastrous under the previous mayor, so much so that it was rejected by inspectors and what have you, and it didn't do us much credit because it had been such a failure. So unfortunately, where we are is on the back of a very poor start some 4 years ago. But I think everything's moved on. I think the government is giving very clear indications of the direction it wants to go in. I think that it's quite important we're able to grasp that, and I'm keen to do that, because I feel that, for example, part of the area where you're in the council is some of the most beautiful and irreplaceable countryside. You've heard me talk about this before. We happen to both enjoy that because we live in a very beautiful part of our area, but not just our area, but the country as a whole. And clearly you want to protect some of those very important places like that. On the other hand, Bristol is crying out for housing, absolutely crying out for housing and wanting to have housing because there's such huge need. And, you know, it is desperately. People are on waiting lists, thousands of people suffering every day, not living in the conditions that we would never tolerate in our own lives. And we've got to do something about that. So I think that a spatial strategy across the region, supported by government, gives us the opportunity to square that circle, where we can start making decisions where we protect beautiful and irreplaceable countryside and at the same time build homes. And we can do that by looking at the region as a whole rather than the more smaller areas of councils. And, you know, I don't need to tell you about Baines because you know as much about it as I do. But, you know, you've got a World Heritage City, an amazingly beautiful countryside all around it. Where do you build? Quite tough. South Gloucestershire has got its own challenges because in some parts it's very like an extension of Bristol, the North Fringe there. And yet it also has very rural areas. And in fact, of the combined authority areas, it's got the biggest area. I think it's something like 138 square miles. Bristol, I think, is 40. And I think Baines is something like 100, something like that. So, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure I am wrong slightly on that. But there are different challenges, and I think we can deal with them much better having a regional strategy. And I'm quite excited about the possibility of getting on and addressing some of those real challenges.
Thank you, Metro Mayor. That's very helpful. So, Councillor Wells, you have a further question. This I think will be your last question, Metro Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. So regarding the ongoing discussions with the government about further delegation of powers to the combined authority, can I ask the Mayor, what's at the top of your wish list powers that the combined authority doesn't currently have that you would like to have?
What we need is an organisation that's politically responsive, because what we need is politicians rightly should be held to account. That's why I come to your meetings, unlike the previous Mayor. Because I think that's really, really important. But what we also need is an organisation that can respond to those political leads, because you're rightly holding me to account. I'm trying to answer and say, look, you said to me, why is the franchising paper not where you hoped it would be? What I need is an organisation that can better respond to those kind of requests, so that things are on time and more comprehensive than perhaps they've been. I don't think that's a unique thing to the combined authority. I think unitary authorities can perform better too. I mean, my issue has always been I'm very impatient to get delivery. I don't think we're delivering anywhere near as fast as we should be. I think that is not good for the people. That's why people go and vote for us. When people are asked to vote for the mayor, there's nearly 1 million people who are asked to go out and vote, and they each spend probably about half an hour going to the polling station, thinking about it and coming back again. We don't do that for no reason, do we? There's a reason. It's because the people are our bosses, and we need to have that link. So I'd like the organisation to be more politically responsive, and powers that the government can give to allow that would be really good, because I have to say that the previous Conservative government created combined authorities where the constitution, certainly in our area, wasn't fit for purpose. It is very, very quiet on some really important issues, which has caused difficulty and disagreement, rather than cooperation and positivity. And that could have been avoided, in my view. And so it'd be great if we could perhaps start dealing with some of those things, so that we have more discussion about delivery and all the exciting things we can do, rather than all the kind of bureaucratic and rule issues that often the discussions are about. And we've heard some of that today. We're talking about a report by some auditors, the latest iteration of that, but actually that relates to a period that also covered the previous mayor, not just the time the early part when I was around. So look, great if we weren't talking about those things, and we were talking about, we've got franchising done and we're going to be starting in the south of Bristol. That's going to be our first bit, or something like that. It'd be much better to be talking about delivery rather than all the rules. So I'd like that to happen. Hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you, councillors, for your interesting and pertinent questions, and thank you very much to our Metro Mayor for attending today and being accountable to us, as you have agreed to do, and we are very much appreciate that as part of your role. So thank you for your time.
You're all very welcome. Thank you for having me here today.
And so 1 minute short of your half an hour, we released you. So moving on to item 5 of the agenda, are to approve the minutes. Now, the last meeting, which was on the 22nd of July, I in particular was not happy with the minutes and felt that they didn't quite reflect some of these statements that have been made. So I asked for amendments to be made to those minutes, which have been drafted and you have before you in your papers. Is the committee content to agree that those minutes as amended are a proper reflection of the meeting that took place and can be agreed? Do we need a proposer and a seconder, or do we just agree?
Propose and second for the amendments.
Okay, so are we generally in agreement? Do I have nodding heads? Thank you. Do I have a proposer? Thank you very much, Councillor Weston. Do I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Peat. So those are now approved. Thank you very much indeed. And then moving on to the minutes of the 22nd of July, our last meeting. Are there any comments on those minutes, or Councillor Hodge? Councillor Hodge, we haven't got your name, so that people, as we're all quite a new committee, it's useful to have names out front. Thank you very much. Do you have something you would like to say about those minutes?
Yes, I do. in the course of the meeting, Chair, thank you, I made a point about the availability of the papers to committee, them coming forward in advance, forward in advance, and that was noted. And I think you made a statement requesting that that did happen, and I don't see that reflected in the minutes anywhere.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge. Are we content for the minutes to be amended to reflect that request by Councillor Hodge and the discussion? I see that the committee is generally in agreement. So could I ask our monitoring officer what the process for that is? Do they have to be separately amended and then come back to the next meeting, or can we do that, as it were, on the hoof today?
If you're proposing an amendment that everybody agrees was discussing, then they can be included today. So it's just to note that you wish to have the papers provided earlier.
Yes, that's right. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for that confirmation. So on that basis, do we have a proposer and a seconder for those minutes to be approved with that amendment? So proposer by Councillor Hodge, seconded by Councillor Wells. Thank you very much indeed. That means our minutes are approved, which takes us on to items from the public. We've had 2 questions submitted by members of the public, and written responses have been provided and are available on the website. We've also received 5 statements and 2 members of the public, which include 1 ward councillor from Bath and North East Somerset, are present today to read their statements to us. One of the statement from Duncan Hounsell, is not yet on the website, but that is an administrative error which will be sorted out, and it will be on the website from later today. So members of the public have 3 minutes to present their statements, and David Redgewell, a regular attender, very nice to see you as always, knows the drill and is here. And so I don't know who's here and timing. We have our statutory scrutiny officer ready to time David, your 3 minutes start now.
I speak as a member of your bus advisory panel with Quaker and North Somerset Council. There's a few issues to raise. The first thing, we're unhappy with the role of the panel at the moment. I've just spoken to the mayor. We've asked that we look at how that panel is chaired. It's chaired at the moment by a civil servant from Manchester. We want that chaired by the mayor or by Hannah Young. It's very important. It spends large sums of taxpayers' money, £11 million for First Group and others, between the 2 authorities, a joint authority. And at the moment, we didn't have a meeting to look at the changes. I've spoken to Stephen Peacock about this. We've got a meeting on 27th, but there was a lot of changes, which left a lot of communities without buses. Not so much on the Somerset side of the river this time, but on the Gloucestershire side. We ended up with no evening services between Bristol Parkway Station and Bath. Sorry, that's coming to Somerset. The 19 has no evening service to get up through East Bristol to the Parkway Station, making changes for poor working class nurses and people who are care workers. And we need to resolve that. The buses turn at Down End. I'm sure why Down End is a turning circle, but it's not serving the community. We have a problem with the transport levy in South Gloucestershire. It's obviously not enough money. It's not enough money in Bristol, but Bristol obviously are putting some more money in. And we have no buses at the moment across the Gloucestershire border between Yates and Wootton Under Edge. That is a issue. I've just asked the mayor to seek a meeting with some councillors in Gloucestershire to arrange the full council meeting. I believe that's going to happen. Thank you, Stephen. I think that's going to try and resolve it, but it will won't be resolved by every talking to each other, it'll be resolved by money, Chair. And that's the issue. Gloucestershire, South Gloucestershire County Council, and because it's left people without any bus service, and it's left a Westlink service, which is now run partly for school transport, which has shocked me. I don't know how that's been agreed, but certainly this morning we couldn't get buses out of Wootton Under Edge this morning, as WECA promised us, down to Yates, because the Westlinks were on school journeys. And I couldn't get to a funeral. I did, because I hired a taxi, but I couldn't get to a funeral on Friday. Westlink failed me totally. And that was then going to Wesley Cemetery. That was Laura Welty, somebody you know very much here. Very sad. Westlink is not functioning the way it should do. On franchising, fine, but Labour government has to fix it in London. We don't have the powers down here, so we can keep saying it, but we need to fix it. Chipping Salisbury has a 90-minute service to Bristol now. It's lost all its direct buses. Beautiful Cotswold town, no bus service, Chair. That is just needs to be resolved quickly, and we need a conversation between now, not next April, with First and Stagecoach. But that will involve Gloucester and South Gloucestershire Council. Okay, and the other things on rail, welcome Ashley down. Pembury Station still doesn't have planning permission. That is worrying me, and we need to get the planning permission through, Mark, as soon as possible, because obviously there's a spending review. We need to get on with those rail projects, and also with Charfield. I want everything that Stephen's doing here to turn this ship round, and bringing in people like Kevin Slocum and Simon and people to turn it around. North Somerset needs to join them. We're talking about it tomorrow, and we need to make sure we were at Western Gateway and Clybud's been appointed there. So thank you, Stephen, for what you're doing. There's a blooming ship here to turn, and it needs to deliver. Finally, the bus timetables on the bus stops are still not right, but I'm talking to officers. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jill.
Well done, David. A consummate performance, and kept within your 3 minutes. We know you can talk for much longer on all these subjects without a note, and we do have your fuller statement published online, so that is a very useful resource for all of us. So thank you very much indeed, and for coming today. So if I might invite Councillor Duncan Hounsell to make his statement.
Right, good morning. Thank you, Chair and Committee. I'm talking about the WECA outline business case for the Bristol-Bath Strategic Corridor proposals. Few would disagree with the narrative about congestion, the need to reduce carbon emissions and to seek a modal shift from car to bus and active travel. Few would disagree with the noble aims of addressing climate change. However, does the scheme match these ambitions? Does the proposed scheme represent value for money? There is a benefit cost ratio, BCR, stated at 1.5. That's for every pound spent, there's 50 pence of benefit. Now, most of the benefits are not economic, but monetize environmental and health benefits. Most of the claim benefits are based on physical activity, I guess the walking and cycling. Despite that, according to WECA press releases, the cycle path alongside the Keynsham bypass has for now been taken out of the proposed scheme, contrary to the stated vision of a continuous cycle corridor between Bristol and Bath. What cyclist would take a detour into hilly Keynsham? There's some benefit claim for noise reduction. The outline business case refers at one point to reduction in nighttime noise for a scheme that's about active travel and daytime bus time efficiency. The OBC also claims greenhouse gas reductions. Now, this BCR has been subject to sensitivity tests. It rises to 1.8 in the most optimistic of outcomes, but reduces to 1.2 based on comparative case studies, and 1 if there's only a 25% active travel share. The benefit cost ratio is described as giving medium value for money. Now, to give a sense of perspective, a reopening of Saltford Station had a BCR of 2 some years ago, and that was before environmental factors were considered. The A4 corridor calculation gives a negative effect for economic efficiency for business users and providers and consumer users. It's only positive for commuters. The cost is about 26 million, of which 21 million is planned to be spent in one financial year, 2026-27. Predicted average bus journey time savings in the 2 sections from Hicksgate to the Globe, eastwards 1 minute 44 seconds, westbound 41 seconds. That's less time than I've been speaking. Now, aspects of the A4 corridor proposals are unpopular, particularly those relating to the Keynsham bypass. Concern for many is about the practicality of the proposals, not the aims. Concern is also about value for money. Corporate risk is said to be minor loss of confidence. I suggest corporate risk is a major loss of confidence. The scheme does not yet represent value for money. As a scrutiny panel, you have much to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hounsell. That statement's much appreciated, and as it will be on the website for people to be able to read by the end of the day, as I understand it. So thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our item 6 and items from the public. So I'm going to go on to Chair's announcements. I have one matter I want to raise, but I'm going to open this up to members of the committee to raise any points that they would like to make that don't appear within the agenda. So if there's anything that anyone would like to raise at this meeting, could they please do so now? I think Councillor Hodge, you had something you wanted to raise.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to raise the same point I raised at the last meeting, actually. I think we have to do, I was disappointed not to witness a change. And when we received the papers, I think the public should be aware that we received the papers for the WECA committee to be held on Friday of this week. We received them at 5 o'clock on Thursday evening, which gives us one working day, if we're available on that day, Friday, to try and scrutinise 8. This upcoming committee has 8 very interesting, comprehensive papers, 184 pages, wide-ranging, all range of different subjects. 76 pages of appendices, 260 pages in all. This is your one scrutiny process. We're here, we're doing our best, but it's totally inadequate, and it's also discriminatory against working people that may have commitments with their families, within their communities at the weekend. It relies upon one doing that work throughout entire weekend to be here at 10 o'clock and informed. I don't think it's an acceptable way to carry on. And I think I think the process, allowing even one more day, could give us 48 hours to read the papers. They could come out on a Wednesday night rather than a Thursday night. I would really ask that it is looked at so that we can do an effective job. I'd like to compare this. I'm vice chair of the Baines Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Committee. We have 1 week's notice with our papers, and the meeting is held at 4 to 6, and we can adequately scrutinise because we have 1 week to read the papers.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge, and I think Councillor Wells has a point he'd like to make on the same subject.
Yeah, just to second everything you said, Councillor Hodge, I completely agree with you. But just to add to that as well, that there are members of the public as well who their contributions to this meeting would be incredibly valuable. I've encouraged many community groups to try and contribute to this, because although they have another chance at the committee on Friday, often in this forum we do have an opportunity to go into the papers in a bit more detail in certain areas than they will be on Friday. So. But the members of the public had even less time than us, because they were required to submit their questions and statements mere hours after the papers were actually published. So I'd like to hear actually if there's been any progress on this from the combined authority. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wells, and I completely agree with everything you've both said. For the record, could I ask our CEO to respond?
So I will. First of all, I won't improvise. That's why we have a monitoring officer here. But I believe that the timings on these things are actually set out fairly clearly, and aren't just to be changed at the whim or decision of a chief executive. So we need to be aware that these papers are there to serve the committee, which is the correct forum for decision making. I appreciate you also want to look at them. You also have your own forward work program. Last time we talked, didn't we, about the fact that we do need to also have a work program for the year ahead for scrutiny to be truly effective. It shouldn't simply be man-to-man or person-to-person marking the committee. I think that's not the best use of your time. You won't have enough time to do that job. There are meetings off camera with leaders and officers in the preparation of all these documents. I recognise scrutiny has a job to do. We just are not going to be today overselling what we can do without recognising that would be a significant change to the whole cycle of governance of this combined authority. Bob, you could let us know perhaps of what would be involved if we were to change the governance and the rhythm of the whole process, if you could, please.
So the statutory requirements are that we produce the papers in the time that we do, and I believe the reason why the overview scrutiny was set in the way that it is was to receive those papers and have at least some opportunity to comment on them. The papers are produced for the committee, meet those statutory deadlines. There is obviously an awful lot of activity that goes on in the preparation of those minutes, and they're going on right through that period in order to refine them, negotiate with the unitary authorities, and make sure that what comes forward is appropriate for the decision-making process that the ultimate committee has. If there is an opportunity to do that earlier, then we need to build that into the process, but that will involve pushing that decision making and making sure that the any consultations and collaboration happen much earlier. The way that overview and scrutiny works, I think, in those circumstances where the way that overview and scrutiny can work here in the circumstances where we've got ourselves into a timetable for production of papers for committee, is either for you to establish what you want to look at specifically through the forward plan and get to that early so we can produce reports for you, or if we can change the way that we produce our papers, we can build that in earlier. But that means a complete change to the framework that we currently use in order to negotiate and collaborate with the unitary authorities at this particular stage. So there's a lot of bureaucratic change that will be required to get the papers out much earlier than they are at the moment. We're in a completely different position to unitary authorities that are the masters of their own destiny. Our decision-making process, where we need the mayor and all the unitaries to be voting together for any items that come to committee, means that the negotiation and collaboration is something that needs to be ongoing as we go through the whole process. So changing those arrangements will take some time to filter through if we want to achieve that.
Councillor Hodge, you wanted to just follow up briefly?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just want to be clear so that I understand. Obviously, it's new to me and I want to understand. So the statutory requirements, are they very specific about the exact day? So the exact day, the Thursday, is there no flexibility in that? And I think even one day would make a difference. And the second point I would make is that the timing of the committee, is there any flexibility on the date of the committee? So for example, if the committee was held on a Tuesday, again, you would have one extra 24-hour period to look at these documents. I think that would make a huge difference.
So legislation requires the papers to be produced at least 5 clear days before the committee is held. So it's at least, so there's flexibility there. So it's about the last time that you can produce those in order for a decision to be made.
So that does mean that they could be produced. You know, I know what you're saying about the complexity about getting agreements with the papers, but the draft papers are going around for months beforehand. And I would have thought shifting the day that they're released, published by one day is quite a small proportion compared to the activity that's going on.
And I think, yes, of course, that could be done. I think the point that has been raised is that the process of achieving, broadly speaking, a consensus in these papers is unlike in a unitary authority, in that it takes a lot of doing. And I think it wouldn't need me to remind you what happens when we have committee meetings with adjournments. We want to avoid that. We want to make sure that we do the work that we need to do, so that what you see in this pack reflects as much as possible the view of all of the political leaders across the unitary authorities and the mayor himself. So to try and work back and give ourselves 1-2 more days might sound simple. I just think Bob is correctly not wishing to make it sound like a trivial matter, because we have built a mechanism to enable us to reach a point where we have better quality committees at some great cost. And so putting in more time might sound easy. We just need to go back through the leaders, the chief execs, and we would need to a new timeline, and they would need to buy into it. So we can take that away. And I totally understand what you're saying about the practicalities of having such a huge doorstop of a document land with no time to read. We understand that. We don't want that either. That's why there's the other point, which is if we can also try and collectively, and I think officers absolutely have a part to play, and just look at the forward work program and improve the quality of that, because I think that is how you'll get better quality scrutiny, because you actually be talking about things before they're at the final destination before a committee. That, I think, is where scrutiny does its best work generally. So I don't say that instead of having these papers, but I hope that one mark of success would be that in future you will find that most things that come to committee are things you probably already knew something about, and that most of your work is on getting ahead of it time. So we'll take away the request for a remaking of the timeline, and we'll discuss it with the UAs and come back to you if that's okay, Chair.
That sounds very sensible. Councillor Peat.
I would like to second Councillor Hodges' concerns, and part of me feels that perhaps they reflect the positions of our Metro Mayor, in that it appears that, everything seems to be done off screen, and then for us to be given a very large wad of paper that we have to scurry through without being able to truly appreciate the details properly. That doesn't seem like a way of doing good business, and certainly not a good way of doing good scrutiny. You've made lots of representations just now about how, this will take such a long time, we'll have to get it through the executive, we'll have to do this and that. And it, to me, sounds like excuses are a way to deter us from asking for actually reasonable time.
First of all, the mayor prefers to meet in public, so you heard him say that, and I think all of the executives and the other leaders will attest to that. So it doesn't proceed as you've just indicated. And secondly, the purpose of scrutiny is absolutely to hold to account the political leadership and the executive. I'm trying to say that it's not necessarily best served by solely focusing on a bunch of committee papers that are the result of the DNA of a combined authority, which is compromise and discussion amongst your own authorities. And I recognise you are scrutiny, you are not from the executive of the authority, if there is an executive. I understand it's a difference, but the documents before you are the end point in a process. They are right before a decision is hopefully made in 5 days' time or 3 days' time. So there's better work to be done alongside that, which is to talk about strategic items before they're about to hit a committee with the decision. That is a better use of I believe, of scrutiny. It's what works best in UAs. You get under the skin of strategic items before they are coming forward. So then they will have been informed by that conversation when they do emerge as decisions. So it's not trying to avoid your request. I'm simply saying there is a better way for scrutiny to do its job more effectively. We will take back the request to bring forward the timeline. We will have to do so with the consensus of all the UAs, because what you see here is the product of them agreeing. And so we'll just have to build some more time in, and that will take their agreement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peacock. So, Councillor Addison, I'd quite like to draw this to a conversation to a closing, but please do say what you'd like to say or ask a question.
Thank you, Stephen. I do appreciate what you were saying there, and I think it sounds like a very good way of working. It does require us to have a very early visibility of what is coming down the pipeline for decision, and also a very early visibility of the draft documents which are being used to inform that decision. So I think on that basis, if you can make those documents available, I have no objection in working in that manner at all. I don't know what the rest of the committee thinks, but I think it does feed into Councillor Hodges' initial point is we don't need to see the final document. In that case, we need to see the draft documents as they're developed so we can provide an input.
I think what is very clear from what our monitoring officer and our chief executive said, that it's a complex process getting these papers to this committee and to the joint and to the committees that sit next Friday, on this Friday rather, I should say. And what I would like to do is I hear the willingness to see if we can squeeze maybe one extra day for our consideration of those papers, and that's received very gratefully by this committee. But also, and I have been keen for a long time to get this committee better informed and for the forward plan to be more useful to us. And the next item that we're going to talk about is the work plan, the subjects on which we need to be better informed and educated, and for this committee to decide whether or not it wants portfolio holders who are going to sort of do the greater amount of work on particular subjects to enable this committee to operate more effectively. I would like to be being discussed in the workshop that's coming forward. So what I will invite our officers to do is to include in the workshop, along with the subjects that we're going to be starting to get informed on, discussion of the forward plan and a discussion of how this committee might work more effectively given the statutory timelines and the practical difficulties of looking at the final papers for the meeting on Friday. And I hear Councillor Addison's request about the draft papers. That may well form a useful part of the process. So I suggest that we note what the offer that has been made, which is gratefully received, and that we take this conversation on in the workshop to include working practices as well as some of the subject matters. Are we all happy to proceed on that basis? Yes, thank you very much indeed. The second matter that I wanted to bring, or the first matter that I want to bring to the Chair's announcements, is that we have the SOLAS report in the papers before us, but not the Grant Thornton report. The Grant Thornton report is the update to the report that was made back in 2022. I have read that because I attended the audit meeting, as did Councillor Addison last Monday. And it's on the public website under the audit papers. But I feel myself that Grant Thornton report ought to come to scrutiny as part of the transformation programme response to the best value notice, etc. So I have mentioned this to our monitoring officer. I would like to propose that the Grant Thornton report is brought to scrutiny at the next meeting, along with the update on the transformation programme, which I'm sure will form part of the papers before us. I appreciate that it's a report commissioned for and received by the audit committee, but there is a synergy between that and the SOLAS report and the history leading up to the best value notice, and we are expected to scrutinise the transformation programme. So I think that's material that ought to be brought to this committee. So I ask for that to be done. Is everyone in agreement that that is a good idea? Yes, thank you very much. I hope that will not prove controversial. As I'm received with silence, I'm assuming that it isn't. So I'm grateful for that. So can we then move on, unless there is any other general matters? No, I'd quite like to move on to, we've got lots to do today. So can we move on to the committee work programme, which is a draft work programme which was sent to me by the Combined Authority officers. It's at Appendix 1 of the papers for our meeting today, and it's at page 25. Overview and Scrutiny Work Plan 2024 to 25 suggested topics. Now, the idea of this was exactly as our CEO has just been describing, for this committee to be better informed and to receive some education on the projects which are coming up that we will be in due course scrutinising, to enable us to understand it better, discuss with our own authorities, and work out how we can best monitor and perform our overview and scrutiny function. The proposal is that we have a workshop on these subjects, and the purpose of this discussion is to make sure that the suggested topics at pages 25 and 26 are the topics that we would like to learn about. And I haven't had any input to that. I thought it was important that this came to the committee as it was presented to me. These are the subjects which we are being informed, I assume, are going to be coming forward for discussion and decision under the forward plan. And so these are the areas that we would be talking about at a workshop. And part of this, I'm hoping, is that we will, for some of these sites where we're talking about infrastructure and big sort of project development, it will include at some stage during the course of the year site visits, so that we can actually see what's happening on the ground and better understand the work that's happening and its purpose and hoped for effect. So could I ask our CEO to elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you. It was a suggestion which I think we all welcomed last time, and this was very much a starter for 10 from, well, actually, they're all in the room here. So if you have questions, they'll be no doubt happy to answer why did they put these on the list. It's obviously worth keeping some slots empty because things do change. It's nice to imagine we know what the world is going to look like for the next 12 months, but I'm pretty sure we don't. And for example, you'll have noticed in the main committee pack, there's work in there on the local growth plan agenda and some new language actually. And I think there'll be some things in there that probably do come up either through the next spending review or the English devolution bill. So just really to say, this is a starter for 10. It's hopefully a useful launching off point. If there are questions about what's not on here and why not, or anything on there, we've got people in the room who'll answer those for you.
Can I invite comments on this as to whether people are happy, feel there's anything missing, or have any questions as to why particular matters have been included? Councillor Wells.
I've got a couple of things, but I'll start with one and then maybe we can come back to me. The CRSTS appears to be missing, and perhaps actually at this point in the, sorry, and I should say for members of the public, City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. Perhaps what I'm more interested in this part of the cycle is the planning for the CRSTS2 bid, which is currently being pulled together by officers. And although it will just be an initial bid, that will shape what the programme looks like from 2027 onwards. So we can have some useful input, I think.
Thank you. So we have the officer here in the room who's hot-footing it to the table to answer that question. I'm grateful, Mr. Salmon. Thank you very much indeed.
Good morning, committee. Good morning, Chair. In relation to CRSGS, absolutely, there's opportunity, I think, for site visits. As you know, CRSGS is a number of schemes right across the region, many of which are being delivered by unitary authorities. So as Chief Executive Stephen Peacock mentioned, the list is an indicative list to start with. So absolutely, we can look at some of those sites. And I think for CRSGS2, while we have an indicative allocation, as you rightly say, things are being worked up, and that indicative allocation based on the previous government, we need to see what comes forward for future funding. And so as part of the development of that CRSGS2 plan, there will be opportunities to take scrutiny through some of the regional kind of ambition. And whilst maybe at this stage they aren't necessarily individual schemes, we can talk, about what is being planned as that work's being developed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salmon. So, Councillor Wells, are you content with that explanation and find that helpful?
What I heard there was we can add it to the list. Good. So yeah, and thank you very much for the detail. Very helpful. The second item for me, if that's okay, was the mayor indicated earlier his willingness to revisit the spatial plan, which of course was something that failed earlier. That's not on the list as well, and I think could be an interesting thing for us to look at, and in particular looking at the approach to the spatial plan before we launch into it, and how we make sure that it doesn't suffer from the problems that the last one was beset with.
And just to say, I think this is one of those ones, definitely there'll be an emerging, some clarity perhaps emerging soon. I think the issue for us is what's the right timing for you to have those conversations. You may be aware, for example, that all of the unitary authorities are currently providing their responses to the new planning policy framework consultation that ends in a couple of weeks' time. We need to see what comes out of that, and I think early next year, I think would be an excellent time for a conversation about housing and spatial planning. But it's framing the conversation correctly, I think, will be key. But that's one of those breaking news items. It's fresh, it's new.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hodge.
Yes, thank you. Just going on to a different tack that's supporting everything, and Councillor Wells has said. I was just thinking about the structure of the work plan and how it would be delivered, and whether there's my concern is that how many items would we cover in a session, and how would we prioritise these? Because I understand the point that you're making about not in terms of papers and not expecting to have expertise in all of the areas of the paper, but we don't want to be lagging behind decisions being made, such as the transport infrastructure within the CRSTS. It's moving on very fast, and then we find that our work plan, not just to give site visits, I don't think we really want just site visits. We want to really understand the nitty-gritty of these issues, and if that is to come through the work plan, it needs to be prioritised so we get these things early enough, because all these schemes are moving on. And when you look down the list, there are some that can maybe be parked for later, and some that we need to understand with some urgency.
So as I understand it, the proposal is that all of these decisions and the planning will take place at the workshop. We're not deciding today exactly how we're pinning it down. We are agreeing to have a workshop to address these broad areas, and then to work out how we're going to organise our work effectively over the next year to make sure that we are properly informed about decisions which are coming up at the right time, so that we do have sensible coordination with what's happening at the combined authority. Councillor Weston.
Obviously pro-workshop, which seems to be what we're heading for. Building on what Councillor Hodge was saying, I think as part of that, we do need to understand what the officer capacity to support is, how many of these specific things, because I doubt we're going to be able to get through the dozen items on this list and the additional items being talked about. So I think fundamental that be what can we feasibly get done, but also what's the capacity for, let's imagine we want to look at the decarbonisation support bit. We decide that's what we want to do, and we task a couple of people to do that. Then I would like to understand, where will they meet to do it? You know, how many additional meetings are part of that process? Their access to paperwork in a timely manner, that'll have to form part of the workshop. And my final point, just building on the local plan section of I really do think that needs looking at. However, with the national policy framework or plan framework being up in the air at the moment, and it probably won't land this year, and considering there's the WECA election next year, that might be one that actually needs to come back in May, June, July next year, once we know what all the moving pieces are. Because at the moment, there are too many variables on that one. The CRSTS is a classic example, though, where we need to get it now.
Just a few comments then. I think you are probably right on the planning and the STS, or whatever it becomes known as. As I said, it depends on what you want the topic to be. If you want to talk about what our input ought to be, then it could go earlier. If you're waiting to see what might come out and then respond to it, then it would definitely be, you're likely to be caught in the pre-election period. I think you're right. The format and the kind of the way we do it, how many can we cover, how many topics can we cover? Typically, I think when I used to do scrutiny in the UA, you'd think you could do three things in a meeting well, anymore, and you're really stretching a point. Officers would tend to take the exam question, go and write a piece, drawing on existing material, but putting something specifically together for that item. Send it, you read it. They wouldn't then present to you for half an hour. You'd have 5 minutes, but then it would all be about questions. So we tailor and we slightly bespoke existing material so that it's specific and relevant to you. As I say, we find any more than 3, everyone gets a bit tired. And there is a workload issue for officers, but that's where, if we're drawing on work they're already doing, it's reasonable, and it's acting reasonably, I guess. And the final point, I think I heard allusion there to the possibility of task and finish groups, and those are always things you can do. Of course, it's your choice, and again, that's a question of the capacity commitment you have, as well as to a certain extent officers. But I suggest the onus is there sometimes on members whose time is very, very scant.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Obviously, standing in for Councillor Thomas, who has had a look at this more closely than I have, and he's got some suggestions that he wanted to add to the work plan. I just wanted to check whether those had already been received or whether I need to flag them now.
They have been received by me, and they were all very matters which certainly ought to be discussed by scrutiny, but they are more, as it were, structural and about process, whereas this list is about subject areas. So I will share those with these statutory scrutiny officer has that. I don't know whether our monitoring officer has had it. Well, I'll make sure that he gets that. They are all matters which I completely agree need to be discussed by scrutiny and will come within the discussions of the work plan. But this is a list of areas, and we need to make sure that we've got the areas right, so that we have the officers, the officers coming along to inform us. And that was why I didn't amend the draft in those. But I certainly hear what he says. Make sure that our monitoring officer has that, and make sure that's not lost.
Right. So just for people that haven't seen it, it's things like the scooter contract and North Somerset joining WECA. There's quite a few things that he's added to that list. So along with the other additions that have been discussed here, you've got quite a meaty list growing.
Can I propose then that, as we're all in agreement, as I understand it, that we should have a workshop, that these are the broad areas that we ought to be looking at, and then there might be some additions, that I'll send that list to the monitoring officer, and perhaps we could have an amended suggested topics paper, and then we can then work out when we should hold the workshop, which will probably be a matter that won't be that easy to fix, but we need to get on and start that. And at that shop, we will decide how we're going to go forward and how we're going to timetable the learning process, and with officers' availability through the year and so on. Are we all content with that as the outcome for this part of the discussion? Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. That takes us to the last and very meaty item of our agenda, which is the committee work programme. And as Councillor Hodge says, there's some 250 odd pages of detailed papers, all very interesting matters. I have asked for the officers who own these areas to be in the room so that we can ask questions of them. And I'm probably going to cause great upset now by saying what I would really like in relation to each item is for that officer to come and give us a very brief overview and then be available for questions by the committee. It seems to me that there are certain matters that are going to require more time than others. And looking at it myself, I thought there's some big developments in this scaling investment for climate and nature. I'm glad to see that Roger's in the room because there's some really interesting stuff in there. There's some very important matters in the best value notice that I think we will want to look at. And then in particular, the bus improvement options, I think that will require. So those seem to me the matters that we'd want to spend more of our time on, but I'm sure there will also be questions on the other items. So I propose to go through the items, ask the officer if they are here, just to come to the table and to give us a very brief overview, and then invite questions from members of the committee if we are content to proceed in that way. Thank you very much. So item 9, those papers, is the local growth plan. And we have Rachel Pikett, so sorry, coming.
It's been said many ways.
Yeah, well, we'll go with Pikett. Thank you. Perhaps, say you could give us this is a new project, I think, coming from national government initiative, and everyone is having to work very hard at producing this. So perhaps you could give us an overview, and then I'll invite questions. Thank you, Rachel.
No problem. So the paper sets out the ask that's come from government for MCAs to produce local growth plans for their regions and the role that these plans will play in supporting the missions that government has set out for its time in office. The paper highlights that growth plans will be long-term, and the intention is that there'll be 10-year plans to unlock economic growth potential across regions, and they will need to interact with a range of other emerging government plans, particularly around the devolution bill that Stephen's mentioned, the 2025 spending review process that will be kicking off, and the National Industrial Strategy that we're expecting to be published at some point. All of these things will need to interact. So the work to develop our plan is at an early stage. Government got in touch with combined authorities over the summer period. There's been a very swift initial piece of work. So the paper is a starting point. It provides an initial view of potential areas of focus that could feature in our plan, an initial assessment of where the region has good opportunities for economic growth. It also highlights the interdependency of this work with other decisions that committee is due to take on Friday, the scaling investment in nature and climate paper, the bus improvement options paper, and other papers that have been discussed at previous meetings and that will come through the cycle over the coming months, that will unlock the potential for economic growth across the region. And finally, the paper sets out the approach that we're proposing to take for the next phase of the work, ensuring that there's collaboration between the MCA and UAs to ensure that the plan represents the totality of what leaders across the region want to see. So happy to take any questions on that one.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the first question, reserved to myself, sorry, which is in two parts. Firstly, the timeline for this is really quick. This is obviously really important. It's going to, growth for the region is the big subject. The timeline is this plan's going to be completed by late 2024 or early 2025. Our next formal meeting on the 27th of January, by which time the plan will be completed. So my first question was, could we please receive updates on how this is going, because it'll be a done deal by the time we next meet formally. And I think Scrutiny ought to be kept informed of this process, as it's such an unusually accelerated process. So perhaps you could help us with that.
So the timeline that we've sketched out is indicative. So we're not yet clear quite when it will be finalised. But it may well be in advance of the next committee cycle. So absolutely, we can ensure that the right arrangements in place to ensure that everyone's involved.
I'm grateful, thank you. And then the second question I had was that I'd just like you to describe the methodology about how you're liaising with the unitary authorities on this. I know that they are putting forward draft plans of their own. Are you going to adopt those, discuss them with them, tinker with it, produce something completely different? What is your proposal?
So we're working through the Chief Executives group to ensure that all of the proposals that are coming through are well understood, are well discussed, that there's oversight for how we are reaching conclusions on which are the things that we should be incorporating, that there is, and that we're reaching agreement around that. And through the Chief Executives group, we're ensuring that the appropriate liaison with political leaders is taking place.
That all sounds excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Do you have any other questions from the committee? Sorry, I'm Councillor Addison first and then Councillor Weston.
I had a look through the briefing paper, and it seems that a lot of the topics covered by the low growth plan are things that we might have been expecting the unitary authorities and the combined authority to already have under consideration. So the question really is, how much of this would you consider as collating and documenting existing strategies and priorities, and how much do you see as requiring, as the chair says, additional alignment work with the unitary authorities to produce a combined paper?
So I think there'll be a degree of both. So the intention is that these are 10-year plans that set out how we can accelerate growth across the regions. Some of those things will absolutely be how do we deliver plans that are already in place? How could we potentially accelerate some of those plans if those are things that we think are going to be the silver bullet that's going to unlock growth in the region? But it's an opportunity for us to think about, well, what else? What are the additional things that with a new government that might have different priorities? Where are there things that we might want to consider that haven't been on the agenda over recent years?
Thank you.
Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, was a couple of points. One was building on your comment earlier. I noticed the timeline as well. And I just wondered, when we're looking at like things like growth zones, which is in the pack, and all the rest of it, it seems to me that any changes to the national planning policy framework are also going to impact on what's going to emerge here, whether green belt, grey belt, all the rest of it, the opportunities. And that seems to be, that will come out pretty much at the same time as we're putting this in. We're almost going to cross each other over. How responsive are we able to be to tweak things if the MPPF has additional items we might want to consider?
Yeah, so I think what we're initially aiming for is an initial plan which the region can agree with government, but that will be a 10-year plan. So some of the things that we put in there might be an intention to do X, which is dependent on something like the MPPF coming out. So we won't necessarily be able to set out the minutiae of detail in every area, but we'll be able to allude to where are the key areas of focus that we want to look at over the next 10 years, and where do we understand those interdependencies with other reform processes to be, and therefore how do we sequence work over the coming period.
If I may just come back on that, and I'm conscious that I might be picking up on both mics at this point. I just wondered, building on what you were saying, the timeline is coming out in January. We don't really have a meeting, so our ability, would it be possible to have something like an online briefing for us in December, maybe? I mean, easier rather than dragging everyone here, 30, 45 minutes just to run through, so we have an idea for January when it is.
Yes, that's fine. We can schedule something like that.
Very briefly, I just wanted to give a little bit, hopefully, positive news about the mood music, because this, the need to produce this at pace was fantastic timing in many ways, and having something this important to work on as a collective has really changed some of the basics that we were talking about earlier. I think it's fair to say both officer relationships have always been good, but I think there's been a renewed sort of vigor and purpose behind having this document that we needed to produce, and I think it was 4 days, wasn't it? And we did it, and it was politically supported, and I think that's no mean feat in an organisation that's subject to a BVN. So just to note that the positive in doing this, and the fact that as the fastest growing mayoral combined authority in England, with the most productive and best growth story, we should be proud of our opportunity here. It's somehow got lost along the way, but we are the most productive, and we forecast the fastest growth of any mayoral combined authority in England. And this document will help frame all of that.
Well, I'm sure the committee will all agree that's excellent news, and it's also wonderful to hear that relationships are working better. And we ultimately, as I keep saying, we all want the same thing, which is for the region to have money injected and for it to grow and to be very successful. Are there any other questions, Councillor Freeman?
Again, channeling Jerome Thomas, who can't be here today. I can just imagine him. He's got some quite specific comments on particular points. Would it be easiest to pass those on to you, or do you want to discuss them? I don't know how much detail.
I have seen these. They seem very detailed. And they're very in tune with what Councillor Thomas's comments are, and I don't think they need to be discussed by full committee. I don't think they'll be controversial, but I think that's something that perhaps you and he can liaise on here after this meeting. If that's, I think that'd be a better use of everyone's time.
Great, thanks.
Are there any other questions on the growth plan? And if not, Rachel, can I ask, are you also going to be the officer dealing with the Best Value Notice and Transformation Programme?
Yes.
In which case, should we take that out of order rather than you sitting through other subjects, and then we can release you to other things? So that's item 13 of the Combined Authority papers at page 217.
Could you? Helpful. I'm also doing bus improvement, which is before.
Oh, are you?
So whichever order you want to do them in.
Let's do all the Rachel subjects all in one go. Why not? Because this is linked to the growth, it seems to me, Best Value Notice and Transformation Programme. Let's address that next. Do you want to give us a quick overview as to where we are with that? It's obviously a very important subject.
Yeah. So the paper updates on progress across the programme and the work to respond to the Best Value Notice provides a summary of activity on actions that remain open across that programme. The paper notes the new regional strategic framework, which was unanimously agreed at July committee, and closes the action around that work. And in a number of areas, the paper notes the transformation programme aligns with the areas of focus that the new independent improvement panel is focusing on. And so that rather than duplicate streams of work, those actions are now taken forward with the support of the panel and their insights into those issues. The paper also highlights that the independent improvement panel met for the first time in early September. They discussed core areas of focus that they wanted to look at, and they heard from committee members on the progress that's already been made since the BBN was issued. And they noted positive developments such as the agreement of the strategic framework, and they had a discussion around collaboration around the growth plan and noted kind of the improvement there. A forward plan of discussions for the panel is currently in development to be agreed with the chair of that group. Appended to the report is the follow-on independent peer review from Solace that members have noted previously. And the report sets out that independent assessment of operation across the authority over the past year. Like the independent improvement panel, the report notes some positive developments, and the independent reviewer concluded that the authority is functioning more effectively than a year ago. Though, as members have noted, the report also highlights further areas where the partnership can be strengthened. The ongoing activity to transform the organisation and to support that independent improvement journey will continue, and we're discussing what is the kind of combination of factors that we take forward, noting there's now a range of improvement forums in place. How do we bring all that together?
Thank you, Rachel. That's very helpful. I've got 3 questions which I think might help other people understand what's happening. So I'm going to again ask those first, if that's right. The first question is that this work going forward is very much being led now by the improvement panel. And this is a question I raised at audit last week, which is I would like to know, and it may be you, and it may be our chief exec who can answer this, whether or not there will be some liaison discussion between the chair of that panel, Carolyn Downs, and the chairs of audit and scrutiny, because we are not automatically invited to those meetings. We don't have formal visibility of any of this, and this is going to be the forum in which change is happening. So perhaps I might ask our chief exec to respond on that.
I think we had a conversation. I think that liaison session is fine. We will arrange that, and I'm sure Carolyn will be happy to meet with you and the chair of audit.
I'm grateful for that. I think that will be news comforting to all of us. The second, rather more specific question is in relation to it's the reference for your references, page 232 of the report, where the author of the report makes comments on scrutiny. where he says that although training and work undertaken to support the scrutiny process, more needs to be done. And at 235, he discusses some particular points. And I wonder whether it would be helpful if he could be put in touch with me as chair of scrutiny and anyone else who would be interested to see whether we have anything to learn usefully from him. If he obviously has ideas, which I'd be grateful to hear. And I wonder whether that would be helpful and positive and, well received.
Yes, that's fine. We can take that away and sort that out.
I'm grateful. Thank you. I think hopefully everyone thinks that's a good idea. It seems to me we and I in particular need to learn all that we can. And then the final point is I wanted to endorse the author of the report's request, and this is around page 238, where the transformation plan, as you've drafted it, treats certain areas as closed. I think the SOLAS report author sensibly says this is ongoing. It shouldn't just be treated as closed. There must be a mechanism to make sure that these matters continue to be reviewed. And he lists the actions, its numbers and letters, TP4, etc., etc. They're all important subjects for those who've read the report, and I endorse that and ask whether you're going to take that forward and keep those alive so that we can continue to have visibility on how change is happening there.
Yeah, so I think I can't remember if it was at the last scrutiny meeting we covered a similar point that while they are closed items in terms of transformation activity, they relate to areas of work that are business as usual, and so there is ongoing work taking place. If there are particular topics that you would like us to provide updates on in future, we can liaise about how we can do that.
Yes, I think the author of the report was worried that business as usual might just sort of get lost in the business as usual. So we hear what you say about us being interested in particular sort of areas, and they're probably all the usual hot topics. So we're grateful for that indication that we can continue to monitor what's going on with those. Now, there's an awful lot of material in this report, and so I'm going to open this up to the committee now to ask any questions. Councillor Wells.
On that last point, I think we need to just take care that actions aren't being passed from one area of the business to another and that they are actually getting completed. I have one question regarding one of the ongoing actions for the transformation programme around project monitoring and evaluation, which was identified as a weakness. And I think scrutiny clearly has a role to play there. That's kind of one of the purposes that we exist. The action states that a draft monitoring and evaluation framework has been completed and is in the process of review and sign off. My question would be, can scrutiny have sight of that framework before it's signed off? And is scrutiny systematically written into that framework as part of project monitoring and evaluation?
Can I take that one away and speak to the relevant officers, and we can ensure that we bring that one back?
Thank you. Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Chair. So just want to sort of echo, I think where we can learn better scrutiny, I think we should, but the SOLAS report itself, is that sitting more firmly with audit than us? Because what I hate, what I don't want, we have a huge amount of stuff we need to do. So if it is about process, procedures and governance, I just want to be sure, are they doing it or are we picking it up? Because I'm not sure where it's sitting at the moment.
That's a very good question, and there's always a bit of a sort of fudge between the two. It is a grey area. We have Councillor Addison here, who sits on both. He is the golden thread to make sure that everything is covered, which sounds onerous responsibility. But yes, you're right. The Grant Thornton went before audit. SOLAS didn't, but that might have. I don't know if that's functional or because of when it was published. Perhaps the first or the second.
It's because this was part of the transformation paper, so the SOLAS report came as part of that to this committee, whereas audit received the Grant Thornton reports because it always receives the external auditor reports.
Understood. And I still think it's important that we see the Grant Thornton report as well, because they very much go hand in hand without treading on audit. How would you like to take that question further, Councillor Weston? I think there's sort of what's audit and what scrutiny is not perhaps entirely well understood by all of us.
Sorry, mic on. I confess I'm previous chair of audit at Bristol, so I sort of in my many years service. No, I probably would say this more sits with audit, but only if audit are picking it up is the thing, because it is about the process and procedures. So possibly, if you don't mind, Chair, I would say an email from yourself to the Chair of Audit and just make sure that it is being, both sections are being picked up. I think we should have a sight of it and we should see what's going on, but I think they're the ones who will probably devote time within their meetings to follow through, and things like the closed actions, just making sure what is the review process on them. That probably more sits firmly with their heads of terms and how they operate than ours, but it's important that one of us is getting it.
Totally agree. I've had one meeting already with the Chair of Audit to work out, how we're going to work effectively together, and we're going to program in joint meetings with our CEO on a regular basis. And so hopefully those sorts of things will get ironed out as part of that process. And as I say, I don't know if Councillor Addison, you have anything you want to add?
Yep, I do agree with Councillor Weston. It does seem to fit more with the brief for the Audit Committee, and there's no personal interest there because I catch it both ways. So it's, yeah, I would say we should look at moving that to audit.
But the scrutiny sections you mentioned, they are absolutely with us. So if there are tips, then I think that would sit here, but the rest I think is there.
Yes. Thank you. That's very helpful. Any other questions on this transformation item and best value notice? It's a big, important area. It's been, there's a lot of material in those papers, and it's been very helpful to read all of that. So, as I say, I assume this will come back to. It is an ongoing process. I assume this will come back to the next committee together with the Grant Thornton report, and we'll bear in mind what goes to audit, and between Councillor Addison and myself, we'll make sure that nothing gets lost in between the two. So grateful. Thank you very much indeed. Bring that item to a close. I was going to go on to the investment fund programme, but Rachel, you said you had one other item that is your item.
So I'm covering the bus improvement options paper as well.
Shall we be extremely helpful to Rachel and just deal with bus improvement while we're here? So bus improvement options is item 14. This is a very meaty item. There's a proposal for a feasibility study. And a proposal for an arm's length transport executive body. This is extremely transformational, new stuff that's coming down the pipeline in an area which has been dogged with difficulty, shall we say. So perhaps, Rachel, you could give us an overview, as you have very helpfully done on the other three items, and then I'm sure councillors will have questions for you. Thank you.
Yes, so the paper notes that to meet the needs of residents across the region, we need to consider further options to improve bus services, and it asks for committee approval to allocate up to £500,000 for a feasibility study to fully explore the range of options to improve bus services across the region. And as you noted, alongside delivery options, the paper also proposes that the feasibility study considers whether establishing a transport executive body would support the next phase of work in the region to reform bus services. The paper also notes that the government is bringing forward new legislation and is consulting on bus reform at the moment, and that any options for reform will need to interact with that changing process. And with committee approval, work will begin to scope the feasibility study process.
Thank you, Rachel. This is a whole new world coming our way, I think. So do councillors have questions on this? Councillor Weston.
Sorry, I realise it's a whole new world and things are changing. This is very embryonic at this point. It was just in relation to recommendation 2, an arm's length executive body, basically to provide the governance section on it. Who guards the guards? So we've had that before with Bristol Energy and various other things, that it goes out there and then there's almost no scrutiny. So I think as part of the recommendation, I would suggest we need to know who scrutinises that, because at the moment I'm unclear. Now, I think that might emerge down the line, but if we put an early marker now saying that any arm's length needs to be subject to democratic scrutiny, I would suggest.
Completely agree. Can I ask our CEO to respond?
So thank you, Councillor Weston. Obviously, what this does as a paper is frame a piece of work that will need to look at things, many things, of which that will absolutely be one. You'll see here, we use the example of the passenger transport executive. Those things have long history. I can't remember how many decades it is since the last one was created, but there's there aren't many of them around. So we need to do a lot of work. A lot of this feasibility funding, which you'll recognise, 500,000 is an envelope earmarked. It's not just a blank cheque to go away and do what we think is right. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of work to do to even scope the next stage, and governance is absolutely integral to this. So you'll see more on this in months to come and scrutiny to come.
Thank you, Chair. From my point of view, I'd love it to recommendation 2 to read ensuring the right governance, including scrutiny, is in place. I really would. Bristol's experience with recent arm's length stuff is there is one councillor, normally the head of our overview and scrutiny management committee, that is in the know on what's happening with the waste company and the housing company and the energy company, and they're bound by confidentiality that they can't then tell anyone what's going on. So if the wheels are falling off, they can watch them fall off without being able to talk. That isn't quite how I would say democratic scrutiny should work. So I flagged that, and that I do think that might actually be worth a little note to the committee to say we want to make sure the scrutiny there.
Completely agree, and I hope, as our chief executive sort of just indicated, we will be learning from other regions that have this model and are using it effectively. So hopefully, lessons are learned from those well-oiled machines, which hopefully we can replicate here. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I asked a similar question to the Mayor, but perhaps officers might be able to provide a slightly more tangible answer on the work that's been carried out already to date. Perhaps you could just give us a bit of a flavour of the kind of studies that have already been performed up until this point, because we don't have any of that information in the paper.
So I don't have a list of previous studies. Perhaps that's what we can take away and provide committee with a summary.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. Any further questions on this? Councillor Johnson.
I'm just wondering how cost effective £500,000 is for research.
Can I ask our chief exec to respond on that one?
All we know is that if we were to move to a fully reformed passenger transport, whether it's franchising, enhanced partnership plus, the estimates of the cost run into many millions. So we should be not considering 500,000 as an appropriate sum to, as you say, write a report. That's absolutely not appropriate. The reason to have delegations is so that we can go away and do the appropriate work and be held to account for it. So £500,000 was a figure put in to allow us to go away and scope the first phase in what will undoubtedly be a multi-million-pound, very costly and quite long process with no clear destination yet. So it isn't the full cost. It's probably a fraction of the cost of a fully reformed bus service.
Councillor Johnson, do you have any?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult, isn't it? Because we therefore need to understand or have some sort of breakdown of how that money is being delegated as we go along. I understand that I appreciate you can't give a ballpark of a definitive figure at this point, but I think we definitely need to understand if we're going to be spending that kind of money, where the money's gone once it is spent, or even before that it actually is spent, because it's a lot of money.
So all of our expenditure is fully transparent and accounted for. What we're not saying today is we know exactly what the money's going to go on. The point is it's a delegation, but that doesn't absolve us of the need to come back and say where the money's been spent. So it will absolutely be reported.
And I imagine picked up by audit, as I'm sure Councillor Addison will confirm. Further questions on this item from anyone? While you're all contemplating, I have one question, which is, I think what might be useful for this committee is to say, and I don't know if this is even something you're going to be able to answer, that we did a lot of work on BSIP last year and how BSIP was spent, the Westlink service and all of those other sort of related items. And there was going to be a paper on how Westlink was going to be used and developed going forward, which was going to be produced, as I understood it, this summer. And all of those follow-on BSIP work was supposed to be coming back to this committee. I'm not aware that we ever did see the paper on what happens, what's the next step in the BSIP spend, how Westlink demand responsive transport and how all that's going to work. I think it's important for this committee to have continuity and understanding of what's happening. What we've been talking about is something for the future, the feasibility study and the big picture, but actually what our population are interested in is whether there's a bus tomorrow. So perhaps you could let us know what's happening practically in between times, if you like.
Again, let me take that one away. But the assessment work that we will need to do, we'll need to think about the interaction of all of these systems. So that work around BSIP is absolutely something that we need to consider alongside other factors as we move forward.
Grateful for that, but I'd be grateful for a sort of fairly prompt response on what happened about that paper, that maybe that our chief exec can answer that.
I'm not aware of that request. Obviously, it wasn't here then, but I will definitely take that away and look into it. If you're saying that Scrutiny had asked for an update and it hasn't come, obviously it should be on a forward work plan. So obviously I wasn't aware, but definitely take that away.
Very grateful for that. We spent a lot of time with the officers, the delightful Bob Scowen and others on how this is all going to work. And I think we ought to be informed on what's happening day to day on that. Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Rachel? Councillor Wells.
Sorry, it's me again. One of the options under consideration as an alternative to franchising is enhanced partnerships. This is a kind of arrangement which is quite similar to various things which have been used over, I would say, the last two decades, maybe before, to try and improve bus services in the region, and in particular in Bristol. And in the past, these have failed to deliver any significant modal shift. Do we have any confidence that that kind of arrangement, could work better this time around?
So I think that's part of the assessment process that we need to go through. We need to fully understand the pros and cons, the costs, etc. of each option, so that the committee has a range of options when it comes to taking a decision on what it wants to do next.
Thank you very much. Was that our final question on this item? I was getting the sense that it might be. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. That's extremely helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to go back to the original order, and then so we would be then going back to the original committee papers, item 10, which is the investment fund programme. I see an officer approaching. And again, I would be grateful if you could remind us of your name and give us an overview, and then I'll ask the committee whether there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm Pete Davis. I'm Head of Grant Management Assurance at the Combined Authority. The report provides the regular update on the investment fund programme. There are two recommendations related to the use of the investment fund. Firstly, the return of a number of previously agreed allocations allowed for in the programme to the headroom. This follows a review of these allocations and their use and timescales to ensure that funding is not being tied up, that could be repurposed and provide other opportunity. And the proposal is to return 13.5 million to the headroom. Secondly, the approval of a business case, a full business case for Visit West, a destination management service with funding of £2 million over 4 years proposed, subject to approval of annual implementation plans. The remaining 4 recommendations in the report relate to transport scheme business case approvals for the CRSTS. I don't need to spell it out because you already had that once today, I think. Approval is sought for the Bradley Stoke Way and A4174 elements of the Thornbury to North Bristol and A432 sustainable transport corridors, with releasing the funding for the delivery of those schemes, with a delegation sought to bring forward the remaining elements of those corridors. And finally, approval of the Baines Livable Neighbourhoods business case is proposed with the release of delivery funding.
Thank you, Pete. That's very, very helpful. And I'm noted from the papers that there's some really detailed descriptions of all those projects at page 39 of the papers onwards, which was extremely helpful when I was looking at these on Sunday. So thank you very much for that. Are there any questions on this item? So Councillor Randalls.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to point out that I hope when the committee make a decision on the Bradley Stoke Way project, looking at page 41, the way the route travels through Bradley Stoke Way, I've raised this at various other forums, where the cycleway will hop over from one side of the road to the other, for about 100 or so yards, then flip back onto the correct side. The reasons I've been given for not following one side of the road is it's very, very difficult to reconfigure the road layout around the Willowbrook Centre and Bradley Stoke Library. I just hope that it's not very clear in the documentation, the route that's taking. So when decision makers make a final decision, they realise they're signing up to what is quite a unusual route, but there could well be very good reason behind it. And I don't think it's going to be very easily understood by people, because it just doesn't make much sense in terms of the way that route is travelling up Bradley Stoke Way. It's more of a comment really for the committee later.
Perhaps I can ask our Chief Exec to respond on that.
Yes, sorry, I missed the start, but I think you were talking about Bradley Stoke Way. And just to say that these schemes will all come from the unitary authorities. So the place to ask will be either directly or indirectly to the UAs themselves. We are programme managers in effect. Most 18 out of 20 CRSTS programmes are directly delivered by the UAs. They do the work. They manage the local political engagement. So it's really a question I'm sure that colleagues in South Gloss will be able to deal with.
Councillor Randall, would you like to respond?
But it's fine. It's fine. I'm just saying the decision making to release that money in terms of scrutinising the plan and seeing what's on that plan, the way that route is travelling up Bradley Stoke Way, I just hope it's very, very clear to those decision makers, because from the the map on the page provided, it's not particularly clear. I would just like them to be aware that the route it's taking is not particularly brilliant. It probably could be better, but it would probably require a lot more money to be invested in order to make improve the route. That's all.
I think that has been noted. Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other questions on this item, Councillor Weston?
Mine isn't a question, it's just a comment on papers.
Yeah.
I'm afraid. I'm a big fan of alphabet soup, and I'm a big fan of Good Morning Vietnam, where they talk about abbreviations. And in the beginning of this paper, we have things like the CRSTS, which is just thrown out in a public document. I would suggest at least the first time an abbreviation is put in, it actually is expanded to begin with. Now, we are all here geeks to one form or another and probably know what CRSTS means. But as you flow through, there are some sentences where it jumps from abbreviation to abbreviation. I just think an expansion the first time.
I entirely agree. And that is noted, I gather. Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question regarding the Bath livable neighbourhoods. For the members of the committee and the public who aren't aware, a core part of the livable neighbourhood approach is introducing measures that reduce or remove through traffic through a neighbourhood. I think most would agree that that's part of the definition, and therefore leading to modal shift within those areas and the surrounding areas as well. That's the overall intention of livable neighbourhood. Many of the areas in Bath's full business case appear to just be getting minor highways improvements, public realm improvements, but no actual changes to traffic flow within the area, but badged as a livable neighbourhood scheme. Now, I agree with Stephen's point that this scheme has been built up by the UA, but the combined authority does have a role, of course, in terms of making sure that the schemes that are brought forward by the UAs meet the overall objectives of the programme within which they fall. So my question is whether officers are aware of the limitations of what Bath are proposing. Are they okay with it? And do they believe that those proposals are in line with the overall objectives of the CRSTS, the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement?
I don't know whether this officer is the right person to answer that question, so I'm going to ask our Chief Exec.
So I do think that the governance is there in the sense that the directors from all of the UAs meet to consider anything that is CRSTS. Obviously, the relevant officers in Baines have the most granular understanding of the scheme, but we, as the overall accountable body, have to ensure that the investments are deliverable and meet the BCR, the benefit cost ratio thresholds that are set to us by DFT. So I'm confident that we have the right governance in place. And again, as you said, as you quite rightly indicate, the onus would be on our colleagues in Baines to ensure that the scheme as designed is capable of meeting with the local support. But as far as the overall portfolio under the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, we have our accountabilities as the overall programme accountable body, including making sure that the schemes deliver the cost benefits. So in this instance, I can only assume, because it's made it to here, that it will have gone through that directors meeting. You can confirm that, Pete, no doubt, and therefore you can assume that that work has been done.
Can I just ask as a follow-up, is cost benefit the only target of the CRSTS programme, or are there other KPIs like modal shift?
Cost benefit isn't the only metric of the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear. There are some requirements in terms of strategic fit, in terms of schemes being affordable, deliverable, having local engagement, and the Liverpool neighbourhood is a strong example of having local engagement and co-design with communities, and also unusually for transport schemes, there's been a testing of experimental measures before things are made permanent. So it's quite a different approach. So the benefit to cost ratio, the BCR isn't all. There are other requirements set out in our own local assurance arrangements, and also set out in the CRSTS agreement with government.
Can I just ask again very specifically, is modal shift one of those targets?
Modal shift is one of those targets, yes.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Mr. Davis? Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just in terms of equality and diversity, I think it's admirable what you're suggesting. I'm just wondering how we're going to track that, and whether we're going to have figures before and after so that we can see impact, both qualitative and quantitatively.
Yes, helpfully, we've just recruited an officer within the Combined Authority specifically responsible for equality and diversity, and who helpfully provided the comments provided in the report. Obviously, the unitary authorities have done equality impact assessments on the schemes. I think only one is included via a link in the report, but the other two can be provided by the councils. And I think monitoring and evaluation came up earlier, didn't it, in terms of the framework? And it's important that we, through the CRSTS monitoring evaluation, we have a wide spectrum of assessing impacts, not just the obvious, very narrow transport ones.
Yeah, I appreciate the ambition, and I'm just hoping to see the actions that back what's been said here. If it does, that's great.
I'm sure that has been noted. Councillor Johnson, thank you. Are there any other questions for Pete on this item? No. So Pete, can I just ask whether you're doing any of the other items, or are you done?
I can do delivery assurance for you, Chair, if you'd like to spend time on that.
Well, I don't think we want perhaps to spend a lot of time on that. What I was going to propose, I think we have 5 items left. Are we all happy to press on and with the aim of finishing at 1, or would people like 5-minute comfort break? Because if you're all happy to press on, and then if you do need to leave the room briefly, then you are hereby authorised to do so, as a couple of people already have. So delivery assurance. Perhaps you could give us an overview. Thank you.
I'll be brief, Chair, given time. So the report outlines proposed changes to schemes within the Investment Fund and City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement programmes. These have been reviewed through the Portfolio Review Board. That's a board that brings together the Combined Authority and Unitary Authority directors and chief finance officers. And the change requests that board have recommended for approval are set out in Appendix 1. The other recommendation in the report seeks a delegation to approve business cases and change requests for schemes within the CRSTS programme to the chief executives. The reason for that is clearly the CRSTS programme has a fixed end date of March 2027, and the delegation seeks to expedite decision making, particularly between committee cycles.
That's very helpful, thank you. Do you have any questions for Pete on item 11, which is page 69 of the documentation on delivery assurance? in the light of the content of the paper and that helpful overview. Now, I think you're free to go. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. That's much appreciated. Thank you. So I'd like to move on to item 12 in the Combined Authority papers, which is a mighty item. It's page 83 to 215 of the papers. And I think we have our Director of Environment here, who I assume is going to be able to inform us on this subject. So there's some big proposals and some innovative thinking informing these proposals as to how to supercharge our approach on the environment by the looks of it. And I'm sure we'd love to hear your overview. Perhaps, Roger, you could remind us, or the committee, of your name and your position here.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Hello, councillors. So my name is Roger Hoare. I'm the Director of Environment at the Combined Authority, and delighted to be presenting this paper to you now. I'll do it quickly and aware that we're short on time. This started in sort of 2023 with a summary of risks for the region around climate and nature being taken to audit committee. So rather than the Combined Authority owned risks, we talked about the top 10 risks that the region faces and what we needed to tackle. Through that discussion and in March committee, we recognised that actually funding and the scale of operation we had, we're doing some great things, but we're just not doing them at the right scale. And so the challenge set was, let's come back to committee with that outline of what do we need and what are our opportunities across tackling our net zero ambition for net zero by 2030, nature and recovery by 2030, and also being a more resilient region to the impacts of climate change. So across those agendas, the paper sets out a huge sum of money that we see as being an estimate, a very, very rough estimate, but an indicative figure of 24 billion that's needed if we're really going to achieve some of those ambitions. And in that context, public investment will not be enough to get there. And so the paper sets out across those three main areas outlines of what we're doing now, but also what we think we should be doing. So recommendation 1 reflects that. That's really very much about setting the context of doing things differently. The private sector investment has to be part of our solution if we're ever going to get to our ambitions. So that's a fundamental, seeking the committee's kind of recognition and support for that direction of travel. Recommendations 2 and 3 cover £11 million investment, and that's seed funding to set up a investment fund that will target net zero businesses and projects across the region. By putting that £10 million of capital in, we're looking to attract £90 million of private investment. And over the period of the term, which is 12 years, looking to turn that around over the first 5 years. So we'd look to have up to about £130 million of investment in the region from that initial £10 million of seed funding. Recommendation 4 is looking at pausing a piece of work we've been doing, which is a pilot project on how we support retrofit homeowners accessing finance to retrofit, particularly targeting those that are not social housing, but in the lower income thresholds for homeowner income. We're proposing to pause that for now because that was a small pilot that would only reach about 300 homes, and looking through a business case we've been working with central government to look at actually scaling that up, and also coming back to committee with a proposal that's looking at another £100 million investment that brings about 60 million of private capital to that challenge for the region. And then the final recommendation is our update on our climate and ecological strategy and action plan. So the progress we're making against the actions we set last March. It's our 6th month update as routine, but it's rather than having a separate paper, given the agenda we're talking about now, we wanted to add that as the detail as an appendix. Hopefully that's clear.
That's very helpful. Thank you. It's exciting projects and exciting times. It does take the Combined Authority into areas it probably hasn't gone before. So I have 2 questions. Firstly, the idea of setting up this fund and to attract 90 million matched by 10 from West of England Combined Authority is very dependent on the Bristol and Bath Regional Capital, CIC. This is the group who are going to you're consulting with to advise you on how you're going to set this fund up. You're going to have to appoint a fund manager, et cetera, and you're going to have to attract this money from private. I mean, there's a lot of work there. You're going to need people who really know what they're doing. What's their pedigree? Who are these people? And why are we confident that they're going to give you good advice and that this is going to be effective?
Fantastic. I think so. Splitting that into two, in terms of the fund itself, this isn't new. The Greater London Authority and other authorities around the country have already explored and run similar funds at a similar scale or slightly larger. And so we are not seeking to reinvent the wheel here. This is about learning from others and reallocating that for the region so that we can attract that private investment. It's tackling a gap in the funding market where projects of between £1 and £10 million really struggle to attract investment. And so that's the role of the fund. And in terms of Bristol and Bath Regional Capital as a CIC, they've got track record in the region. They're well known. They've run city funds with support from Bristol City Council, and that is seen as a success. The work we've done with them to date has been looking at the projects that they see that would come across and come forward for this investment. And actually, we've been through the pipeline with them on those potential projects, and there's huge credibility in terms of what they have done already and the proposals that we can see that would come forward for this funding. So in terms of their track record, they're a known entity in the region. They have proven that they've got real credibility in this space. And then finally, in terms of how we attract that private investment, we've already been talking to regional and national investors to understand their interest in this. And so in the combined authority, we have real expertise in the space of understanding about capital investment and drawing on that expertise. We've been able to bring this fund to you with confidence.
That sounds very impressive and confidence building. So thank you very much for that. And I have one other question before I open it up to the committee, which is the objective here, I assume, is twofold with this fund. Firstly, to improve our journey to net zero, our performance in relation to net zero, and secondly, to get a return or at least a break even. I don't know. That one question for you to answer. What I'm interested in is how practically this is going to happen. So it seemed to me the best information on this in this report was at page 159, which is the investment purposes. And we had 40 million pipeline for asset-focused finance for regional infrastructures projects. There was a 20 million pipeline for scaling up the regional supply chain to meet regional net zero infrastructure needs. And then 40 million for accelerating energy efficient via low carbon heat and energy networks by asset owners. Now, coming at this from a non-climate sort of environment sort of specialist, that's a lot of words, which doesn't mean very much to me. The third item is more obvious. But can you tell us how practically this is going to work? How are those two, I assumed, objectives going to be met practically?
So on the return point, I think our role as an organisation is to enable that leveraging of national capital. And so setting up a credible fund has been our target. I think looking at a return, so we're entering into this kind of agreement on equal terms with the private investors. And there is a point about why not? Why should the public sector always take a loss? I think that is something that will be negotiated over the coming months with the fund manager. But I think the principle of going in there is that actually we need funding to enable other things to happen. And so going in with a return, we're proposing a return of about 3.8 million based on the modelling and the proposal so far for that 10 million. So 13.8 million back over 12 years. That's the position we're aiming for. I think that's the right one for us to start on. In terms of how practical, the outline of those three main sub areas of the investment is kind of the investment and the investigation that Bristol and Bath Regional Capital have undertaken so far is to explore the market and what's there. And so that is the outline areas. It's a mix of it's primarily debt investment, but with some equity. Equity is a higher risk position, and so we would limit that, and so be focusing on the debt investment. But I think everything set out is an outline for now. It'll depend once the fund's agreed and the investors are on board. that's the point in which you'd then assess that pipeline again and what's still required and who's still interested and who we'd be still interested in investing in.
I'm sure this will be part of our kind of work plan going forward. So it might be helpful maybe for this committee to see what's happened. If this has been a model elsewhere which has been very effective, it might be quite useful to, spend a moment just looking at that, what it looks like, which businesses are supported and how the investment is used and the results from it, so that we can understand what our practical aspirations are and be able to monitor it as we go along. So thank you. Councillor Weston.
And dare I say it, Chair, maybe it should come to our work programme meeting to discuss how we scrutinise it and things like that. I just had one question, though, if I may, and it's on the nature recovery section. I realise this is when we're developing a plan to create the pipeline and everything else. I'm always just nervous when it comes to nature recovery, because it seems the one bit that's never ever mentioned is how you work with homeowners to support net gain and things they can do in their gardens to improve it. It's often missed. We go for the big green field items, but actually the largest amount of green space probably in our cities is the private gardens that we never really talk about and how they interconnect with each other. I mean, I was feeding a hedgehog in mine on Saturday, but little things like that. So just of the pipeline you've got, will there be a section in that, or I hope there will be, about how we communicate little things that can be done privately at no cost really to us to try and improve net gain?
Apart from the hedgehog food, obviously. Yeah. Yes, I'll leave it to Roger to respond to that.
Lucky you. That sounds fabulous. So taking Ralph into account, I think there is definitely something through the section. I think you'll see the local nature recovery strategy that we're launching in November in there. And so there's a good chunk of kind of focusing on urban greening and what we do and what our role is there. So I think the point that perhaps we haven't got so far is that story around, as we scale investment, the role of residents, and I think that's a really important one to draw out. So we'll make sure that's added.
Very important point. Thank you very much, Councillor Weston. Are there any other questions? Councillor Freeman. Sorry, I have to keep looking down because you haven't got a thing.
Well, just following on from that, actually, in my area of Bristol and BS3, we are looking at an urban nature reserve, which apparently is a concept that has been explored elsewhere, and we've got some very active people. So thinking about that domestic level connecting up of green spaces, it's a really interesting concept. It wasn't the question I was going to ask, or point I was going to make. So in the action update of the climate and ecology strategy and action plan, you've got a table of updated points there. Jerome just wanted to highlight the joint local transport plan and wanted to ask a bit more detail about that. So who's going to lead on it, what the format is, and how the combined authority will liaise with the unitary authorities and other stakeholders, including this committee, in its preparation. And his point being that he wants a genuinely useful document, not something that's going to be 500 pages and sit on a shelf.
Thank you. So I know that there was a conversation this morning with the unitary authorities about the next joint local nature and transport plan, and so that's an ongoing discussion. So absolutely, it's a key document for us, isn't it, in terms of challenging us and setting that kind of the correct pace of change, and what individual projects will bring to the decarbonisation story and what that means for the region. So I totally agree. That's a key step forward.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I commend the report in setting out the scale of the challenge, which clearly is absolutely huge. I wonder on the carbon front whether the combined authority has considered embedding carbon accounting in a robust way across all of its portfolios and across all of its decision making, both to understand how other decisions outside of your sphere, Roger, might help with that challenge, but also understanding where decisions might set us back against the challenge.
Thank you. Great question. One that actually has come from overview and scrutiny already previously, an audit, and one that we are working on. So we have a carbon accounting policy under development. We have expectations set out for the larger major projects already on our expectations, what we want to see back from contractors and delivery of our projects. So it's in train, and maybe again that coming back and looking at the work plan, we could bring that to you and talk through the detail of where we are with that policy, because absolutely critical to understanding kind of why we're investing where and what the outcome is.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Is there anything else that anyone to my right wanted to say? There was agitation, but you've done it brilliantly, apparently, so no need to add anything. Any other questions for Roger on this? Really? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Really exciting times, very innovative thinking, and we look forward to learning more about it as we go along. So power to your elbow. Right. We have three last items, which are the transport infrastructure budget forecast and then the joint committee papers. So hopefully we'll be able to deal with those before the 1 o'clock, my self-imposed 1 o'clock cut-off moment. Do we have anyone to talk to us about transport infrastructure? We do indeed. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Gibson, perhaps you could, as we have many new committee members, just give us your full name and your position. Thank you very much.
Yes, certainly, Councillor. Good morning, everybody. David Gibson, Strategic Director of Infrastructure at the Combined Authority.
Would you like to give us an overview
of
the transport infrastructure? This is page 289 of the big pack of papers for anyone who's following.
Certainly. So the first item is in relation to West Rapid Transport, which was previously known as Future for West. Members will know that in July we asked the committee to approve the strategic outline case for the project, which was achieved, and that we undertook to bring forward this recommendation to move the project on to OBC, which is what the paper is recommending. The second recommendation is in relation to the integrated micro-mobility service, the contract with TIER. So we are obliged to give them 6 months notice, which will fall due the time when we'd need to do that would be to allow a decision that would take effect at the end of June next year. There is no committee before the end of this year, end of December. So we're bringing this request forward to committee now to get the approval for directors to make the decision on whether or not to extend the contract. We can do it either for 12 or 24 months, depending on performance. And the third item is in relation to the Western Gateway, which we have been acting as the accountable body for, but there appears never to have been a formal decision by the committee to endorse that. So Western Gateway runs with DFT funding until March next year, and we're expecting to hear something hopefully in the budget in October. So it's really administrative to tidy that one up.
Thank you very much for a succinct overview. Any questions from members of the committee on this item? Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. On West Rapid Transit, commend that going forward. Of course, it's a very important project. The question is really, why is it going to take so long? We're talking about 3 years to the outline business case, and then the full business case in 2030, and then, of course, anything actually getting built happens after that. What options have we considered to speed up that work, which at this point is desk work, it's studies? Why so long?
Yes, it's an incredibly detailed project, Councillor, as you will appreciate, and we've whittled it down already to 14 options. Well, and then if we now exclude the significant tunnelling options, there were in excess of 70 options, so that technically there's a great deal of work to do. The impact on the region is significant as well. So there is just an enormous amount of evidence that needs to be gone through, options, appraisals and evaluations of data, etc. So this is a very, very significant project, and unfortunately can't just be done overnight. We will, of course, as we're delighted to actually get this moving now in support of our local growth plan, obviously. So we will do everything we can, working with whoever it is that wins the work to do the OBC, to do it as quickly as possible.
Thank you, David. Any other questions on transport infrastructure? Councillor Wells.
Sorry, well, I'll try
You
and
don't
get
have
us
to
out before
apologise to
1
ask
o'clock.
questions. This is what you're here for, being scrutiny, to do scrutiny.
Regarding the scooter contract, many of us are users of the service and will be aware that there's been a bit of perturbation recently as TIER have merged with another company, and there have been some let's say unexpected changes to the service that's provided in terms of the long-term rentals part of the service being withdrawn with less than 24 hours notice to service users. There were wholesale changes to the pricing schemes as well, and promises from the new company DOT that nobody would be worse off, but actually that's categorically not true. So since we're the committee on Friday is being asked to give you approval to extend that contract, I would like to understand a little bit about what provisions we actually have in that contract with the provider, and are they meeting their contractual obligations? Did we have clauses about long-term rentals? Did we have clauses about the pricing?
Okay, so lots of questions in there, councillor. So the committee decision that we're asking for is not necessarily to delegate the approval to extend the contract, but to take a decision whether or not to extend the contract. So just to be clear, so we don't have to extend. The long-term rentals happen very, very quickly, and it's due to a health and safety issue, which we're exploring with the contractor. Obviously, we would rather that we had contractors who are, supplying services and very safety conscious of the service users. But that is clearly very, very important. We monitor the contract very closely, and I chair the contract review committee with TIER and DOT. There has been a merger, and DOT has made some promises about largely about the way that the app works in the background. It's supposed to be significantly better than the TIER app, and there's data to support that. So we're working with TIER and DOT very, very closely at the moment. In fact, I'm due to meet the new chief exec, I think, in the next week or so. So we'll be going through all of those issues because we want the best possible service, clearly.
Can I just ask you explicitly, are those kind of items, do they form part of the contract that we have with TIER? Or are they just things that are negotiated as an ongoing service?
So specifically in relation to pricing, for example?
Pricing and long-term rentals?
Yes, so long-term rentals and pricing are both in the contract, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for David on transport infrastructure? No. Thank you very much indeed, David. Much appreciated. Thank you. Good work being done. And then the last item for the Combined Authority Committee papers, before we go on to the joint committee papers, is the budget forecast. And we have Solange coming to the table. Perhaps, Solange, you could give us your name and position, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Solange Russell, Director of Finance, Investments and Commercial at the Combined Authority. Hi.
Thank you. So this is page 311 of the papers, and perhaps you could give us an overview.
So this is our regular report setting out the Combined Authority and Mayoral budget forecast. So the main committee is asked to note the forecast position as set out in Figure 1, which includes reserves, the forecast position for the Mayoral Office as set out in Figure 7, the capital forecast as set out in Appendix 2, an update of the efficiency and effectiveness reviews programs are set out in points 31 to 35 of the paper, and is presented for noting purposes alongside the approval of the non-treasury investment strategy as set out in Appendix 4.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Solange on the budget forecast? It sounds like you alone have escaped without any questions. And thank you very much for that overview and for your full report that we've seen in the papers. So
thank you.
Thank you
Thanks as well.
Over to you for the next one.
So again, this is our regular report for the LEP budget forecast, and this relates to capital and revenue funding and also change requests. So the main committee is asked to note the revised analysis of the LEP external grants, which is set out in Figure 1, the LEP revenue forecast, which is set out in Appendix 1, the LEP capital forecast, which is set out in Appendix 2. There's a request to approve change requests for the schemes in the Economic Development Fund and the Revolving Infrastructure Fund, which are set out in Appendix 3. Endorsing the Economic Development Funding splits, which is set out in Figure 6. And then lastly, to authorise the South West Net Zero Hub bid. Thank you.
Beautifully articulated. Thank you. Are there any questions for Solange on those matters? So just to be completely clear, that is to do. Is this the joint committee?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry,
yes,
that's what I thought.
yeah.
You've leapt into my next category. I was thinking,
sorry.
I've missed one. So no, well that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So any questions on the joint committee papers, which of course is the committee that includes North Somerset? So I have one question in relation to that whole area, which might not be for Solange to answer. It might be a chief exec question, which is, is this a proper question anyway, but what is happening about discussions with North Somerset joining the West of England Combined Authority is the first point. And secondly, could we include as part of our training in our workshop some training on the LEP and working with North Somerset, because this is an enormously important area. We're looking at growth plans for the whole region, and there's a big chunk that's just missing down on the bottom left-hand side. So, Chief Exec.
Yes, well, obviously, stating the obvious that North Somerset is not part of the Mayoral Combined Authority, so it doesn't fall within my remit as Chief Executive of the Combined Authority, although I am Chief Executive of the LEP, interestingly. Two for the price of one. There are no discussions between this authority and North Somerset concerning them joining, and we are aware that North Somerset will be taking a paper through its own internal committee. Is that the correct term? I'm not sure, but someone will correct me if that's not what they call it. Thank you very much. Thank you. But that's all there is to say on the matter. Obviously, devolution is on everyone's lips, and we shall see.
Yes, I would just add to that normally we do actually have a North Somerset representative here. Unfortunately, we haven't today, so we can't ask that question directly. But obviously, it's very important, and we look to see what happens there with great interest. So I don't think we have any other questions for Solange. So thank you very much indeed. And that takes us to the end of the papers, and that is the completion of our agenda. And then the final matter to mention is that I need to produce a report to be produced to the committee meetings on Friday, which is a sort of what Scrutiny wants to take from this meeting and feedback to the main committees. I'm very open to, for anyone wants anything particularly to be mentioned, please send me an email with what that is. I will, in any event, draft a report which I'll circulate by which I will circulate in order to be able to get it finalised by the end of Wednesday. So that will come out in the next couple of days. If you're happy, no need to respond. If you don't respond, I'll assume you're happy. But anything you particularly would like to have reported back, please let me know sooner rather than later. I'd be grateful for that. And then we will get that finalised by the end of Wednesday so I can send it ready for the for the papers to be published. Anything else anybody wants to raise? We haven't got an AOB, but I think we are all done and we're within my estimated timeline, which is excellent news rather than excellent. And so thank you very much, everybody, and to our officers. Really appreciate you being here. I know it's a long morning, but it's invaluable. Your assistance and guidance is very much appreciated. Thank you, everybody. And meeting closed.